Hey, I'm Melanie Kembry, and this is The Drop, a culture show from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, where we dive into the latest in the world of pop culture and entertainment. Osman Faruqi is sadly on leave just for this week, but I'm joined by Thomas Mitchell and Meg Watson. Thomas, you've been off jet-setting again from the Northern Territory to New York. What have some of the highlights been from the Big Apple?
Yes, it makes it sound like I went from the Northern Territory to New York, but
you
I
pretty much did. You've not worked since.
Yeah, that's actually quite true. Yes, it was very nice. I went for a week for work for something TBC, but yeah, actually it was very fun. It's obviously a great place to walk around in. I really thought I would see someone famous because every time I've previously been, I've seen at least one famous person. But sadly,
who have you seen?
Yeah, see, my colleagues that I was with saw Sarah Paulson 10 minutes after I left them.
Okay.
So that was about as close as I got to, a famous person experience. But otherwise, it was very fun. And now I'm back.
Eat good food?
Yeah, lots of pizza, lots of bagels. I really feel like the bagel culture, it's surprising to me that it hasn't taken off here, given how much we love breakfast foods and sandwiches and stuff. And everyone over there just eats them.
It's taken off in Melbourne. We've got a lot of specialty shops which are hardcore.
And do people get around it?
Yeah. Like lines out the door every weekend.
Really? Yeah, that's weird.
I'm surprised Sydney doesn't have that. Yeah, that's weird.
I know. And then I was kind of thinking, you always got to be thinking about potential businesses. I was like, maybe that can be a thing that I do in the future.
Open a bagel business?
Well, there's a gap in the market, a gap with a hole in the middle, and I'm going to fill it.
I don't think there is a gap. I think you've just not had bagels before.
No, I've had them before. But when you guys have both been to New York, I'm assuming.
Yes.
You know how it's there's this cafe chain called Bluestone. It's Australians started it. It's really popular, and everyone's like, "Oh, go to Bluestone if you want a good coffee." And I'm like, that you could do that same thing in reverse. Anyway, this is all the stuff I thought about when I was in New York.
Good when you were working for your actual job. Meg, what about you?
My week has been pretty crap by comparison. I have not been in New York. I've been sick in my house thanks to my twins bringing home every illness from daycare. And it's also been made worse by the fact that I'm currently writing the story for the SMH and the Age about watching only 10 play for a week. Oh. And so we've been doing a whole series of them. People have just watched iView for a week, SBS On Demand, and I put my hand up for 10 play, which is all well and good until you're stuck in your house all day with only 10 play to go on. So I've watched a lot of Taskmaster recently. And I was so thrilled when you asked me to be on this week's show because I got to watch something else.
Yeah.
Wait, so how strict have you been?
I've been pretty good. If anything, though, it's made me watch less TV overall because I knew there wasn't much good stuff going. So it's maybe healthier, actually.
Is your partner does a Heedland fall into the remit of this?
That was a real topic of discussion. He was not stoked about the story. But definitely a few nights he was just watching other stuff and I was, cooking and not paying attention or went into my room to watch a much less fun show.
Have you had any other discoveries apart from Taskmaster, which is very popular here? Anything else deep in the archives of Templay?
It's pretty good for reality TV. If you're after reality TV, it's a decent place to be. And that includes not just Australian series, but UK, New Zealand, South Africa. They've got full seasons of Survivor, of things like The Traders, which I know Oz has talked about on this show a lot and is a really decent show. The UK version especially is great. Beyond that, it's pretty bleak. There's no real scripted comedy or drama, which is a real hole. Unless you want to watch The Secret Life of Us, great.
I was going to say, surely that and Offspring would be on there.
5 bedrooms?
Yep. Yes, they have all that. So, yeah, you'll love it, I guess.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to Thomas, no doubt, doing the 9 play one.
I do that anyway. I only watch either 9 Now or Stan, and they just got such premium.
Keep trying to fund your bagel business.
Yeah, correct.
All right. Well, speaking about good TV shows, this week we're going to look into the art of television crime, the popularity of the genre, the ethics and exploitations, when it's done well, when it's done poorly. And we're going to look at 2 big shows which were released recently, Under the Bridge, which is on Disney+, and Presumed Innocent, which is on Apple TV. To kick us off, I feel like there are a never-ending stream of crime shows, documentaries, mini-series. Are you guys big crime heads? Meg, when you're not watching Taskmaster, is it crime that you're hungering for?
I don't think I would classify myself as someone who is a full true crime fan or anything like that. I'm not chasing those really gory docos or anything, but it's definitely part of my diet. I think I lean towards the kind of funnier fictional takes in the genre, the kind of Fargo, you know, Russian Doll was great. Even Deadlock in the past year or so from Kate McCartney and Kate McLennan was really a really fun comedy spin on the genre. But I mean, I'm not above it either. During lockdowns, I binged every single episode of Law and Order SVU. And if you have any idea of the back catalogue of that show, that is a lot of time and pretty bleak viewing as well. So it's part of the mix, but I'm not a diehard, I think. How about you?
I feel like there has been a real rise of that kind of funny crime. Only Murders in the Building is another one where it's less about the crime itself, as much about the jokes that are made solving the crime. Thomas, you like a bit of crime, I think.
I actually am a bit of a crime head, even though I don't classify myself that way. But when I was thinking about this, I do often feel like now one of the first things I go to when I'm looking for a new show, I'll just naturally drift towards the really dark crimes. And I do feel like in the last few years there's been a kind of big shift in the level of quality. I don't know why, maybe this is just in my own head, but I feel like Mayor of Easttown was one that really people got buzzed about it in a way that often these genre shows don't demand. And I think, obviously it had Kate Winslet and it was really dark and gritty and stuff. And that to me is the perfect type of crime show. And yeah, I guess since then I've found myself kind of drifting towards more and more of those really, I don't know. I do like to be disturbed when viewing. I think it's a comfort thing in a weird way. This is the same thing I have. I have this discussion with my friends all the time. Whenever I'm quite hungover, I like watching horror films because it's maybe it's the forced emotion, and so I think it's the same kind of appeal when I go to look for a true crime show or just a crime show in general.
And many people would say that the BBC kind of pioneered the classic crime drama with detectives that you follow for series after series. I quite like those ones. I recently discovered Shetland and watched all 7 series.
And
there's something so comforting in the formula of it. You kind of put it on, nice landscape shots. You know what you're getting. It's not too surprising. It's not too hard to follow. Meg, do you like those kind of classic BBC crime dramas?
I've never got into those really. I mean, I know there's always a channel on TV pumping just non-stop summer murder mysteries of some British description. I never got into those, but I feel like over the past little while there's such a deviation in how we talk about these crime shows because, like you said, there's these prestige offerings, there's Kate Winslet doing Mayor of Easttown, and then on the other hand, Netflix are just slapping out one every week of kind of increasingly disturbing content. I mean, I watched that Dahmer show. It was the show with 10 names. It's Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer Stories, Jeffrey Dahmer Chronicle. But that was really off-putting. And I feel like in the past few years, I've really leaned away from anything that's actually based on true stories, just because there's such a hunger with these big streaming companies, especially to juice them for all they're worth. And that made me a little tentative, actually, for one of the shows that was coming out at the moment, which we're going to talk about.
Yes, and we'll get to Under the Bridge, which is based on a real-life story soon. And it's interesting what you were saying, Meg, because the rise of the crime drama and the true crime drama has happened parallel also to the rise of the true crime documentary, both on screen and when it comes to podcasts. Shows like The Staircase, which really kind of capitalised on that appetite for true crime. Thomas, why do you think people love watching crime? You hinted that for some reason you find it quite cathartic to watch people being brutally killed on television.
Okay, you stitched me out there. No, I do think in a way that, the format is in a strange way comforting because it's always classic story structure of beginning, middle, end. There's good guys, bad guys. It's familiar to us, and so that is appealing in a way. But I don't know if you've heard of a little thing called In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. No, but the genre is obviously really old, as we know. We've discussed this previously. But I feel like crime as a genre used to be especially even in Capote's day, it was a bit lowbrow and stuff. Whereas that has really shifted, and we've been talking about the popularity of crime or true crime for years now. But I think especially in this era of the armchair detective thing that we talk about so much, there is that element of people love to, the rise of like Serial and Making a Murderer, like that thing of being involved in the story in real time as like a big part of, I think, the current obsession with true crime. And then I guess the fact that it is like always that voyeuristic thing of like, getting to like see the icky parts of real life is appealing. Like, it's just human nature. I think we do like to look at that kind of car crash effect where you like can't look away. And I think all of that stuff has been like true forever, but now in this era of streaming, it's like, just like constantly. Oh, I think both of these shows we're going to talk about today, Under the Bridge and Presumably Innocent, are based on books. Like, it's like all the streamers have realized there's so much like material existing now that they can, adapt and stuff. And so it's really like it's all come together to this like perfect marriage of like all this stuff exists. We're already kind of conditioned to be interested in it, and now it's just like, how much can you handle? Yeah,
and Meg, you hinted at kind of you feel a bit of discomfort about kind of the rise of this genre and how readily we are to consume it and make it. And, when industries do see a big boom, and true crime documentaries and true crime is one of those, it's kind of churned out so fast and people are wanting to capitalise on the interest so much that sometimes the ethics of it aren't given time to be considered. So you see documentary makers making shows about people without really kind of giving moral consideration to what they're doing. When did you kind of start to feel a bit icky about some of these crime shows, particularly the ones based on real life?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think to pinpoint a moment, I think something happened in 2014 that collectively broke our brains around that first season of Serial. We all became obsessed with Sarah Koenig and Adnan Syed, and that was the first kind of popular moment, I think, where everyone was hitting Reddit, doing their own kind of investigations into something that this professional journalist was already looking into. And from there, it kind of spiraled out of control. Then we got, the Making a Murderer, we got the Jinx, we got the Staircase, we got all these run-ons that, are great objects in their own right and really interesting and worthwhile investigations in many ways, but at the same time spiraled into this online chaos, which I was very much a part of. I really enjoyed that as a moment, but as the years wear on, we're past a decade since that first came out now. It's just tiring. I think the idea of true crime being this participatory sport is just, there's good ways to do it and bad, and it's an ethical quagmire all the time, but I'm just tired of it, frankly.
Yeah, and we saw it all come to a head, of course, with Baby Reindeer, which was kind of the extreme of that armchair detective. But you were talking about journalists being involved in these crime stories. And
Truman Capote was a journalist.
Capote, of course, was very involved in Cold Blood and is very much a part of that story. And in Under the Bridge as well, there's a journalist character. So why don't we move on to talking about that one?
There's danger everywhere. But danger had never looked quite like this before.
This girl, Rena Vert, she's been missing for 3 days.
That name, I saw something.
What happened under the bridge?
It's an 8-part mini-series which is now on Disney via Hulu, and it's about the real-life murder of 14-year-old Rena Verk by a group of teenagers in British Columbia, Canada, in 1997. It's based on the 2005 book of the same name by journalist Rebecca Godfrey, who in this series is played by Riley Keough, who is also an EP on the show. She returns to her home in Victoria to work on a book, but finds herself, like Truman, part of the story when the body of Indian-Canadian teen Rena is discovered. She's played by Vritika Gupta, and the focus turns on a group of teenagers. Josephine Bell, played by Chloe Guidry, Warren Glatowski, played by Javen Warner-Walton, and Kelly Ellard, played by Izzy G. Lily Gladstone plays Detective Cam Bentland, who has a complicated relationship with Rebecca. Meg, what did you make of Under the Bridge? Did you like watching it?
Yeah, I was pretty skeptical going in for these same reasons. I'm not super into the true stories these days. I'm a bit skeptical of these shows, which are always based around a dead girl in a small town and the mystery surrounding it. But I was pleasantly surprised, I think, just because of the depth of the story, I suppose. There was real compassion for Rena and her family, and she gets a lot more screen time than most victims do when they're kind of dispersed of in the opening ep. Her story is a really interesting one, you know, growing up in this small Canadian town from an Indian family. Her mother's a strict Jehovah's Witness, puts her in a pretty tough position with these, you know, tough girls of the 90s. I thought particularly the dynamic of girls, kind of young girl violence on young girls is an interesting one. Usually when it's a dead girl in a small town, it's like, which of these 12 men did it? They all have reasons. Whereas now it's much more about like, we kind of know who the culprits are, but why would that happen? How could it happen? What is this particular type of violence that young girls inflict on each other and why? I found that really interesting. There's a few caveats there. I found Riley Keough's character a bit strange and, you know, I've seen 3 episodes at this point and I don't fully understand her backstory and some of her motivations, but all in all, I'm having a good time.
And what about you, Thomas? I know you've watched it all and you were kind of hyping this up before it got to Australia because it had quite a prominent release overseas before it landed on Disney here.
Yeah.
Did it live up to your expectations?
Yeah, I think so. I actually weirdly didn't realise it was a true story going into it.
Even
research.
though it says at the start of every episode, this is based on a true story.
Did it? This is like a indictment of my short attention span.
It's okay. Maybe you thought it was a Fargo situation.
Exactly.
And just
Yeah,
lying.
you can never tell anymore. Yeah, I think it's funny talking about these two, Presumed Innocent, which we'll obviously get onto in such close succession. I feel like I really enjoyed this, but it probably felt more like a show that kind of on the surface ticked all the boxes of what constitutes a good, you know, true crime show these days. It had all the elements in place, but I think by the end of it, I was just a little bit it's slightly unsatisfying. I think, even though it did feel like it had the framework to be a really good show. I thought Riley Keough was good, and I was especially interested, I think, in Lily Gladstone because she's had this massive year. You know, she basically, lots of people thought she was robbed for an Oscar. It was her breakout year, and I always find it interesting to see what someone like that does next. I thought this was a funny project for her, because I don't think, you know, her character, they have an interesting relationship. Her character is good, but it was a strange one. I didn't quite understand why she would decide to do this particular TV show where she was kind of third lead really after Rena and Riley Keough's character. But yeah, I guess generally I had an interesting time, and I do think there were, you know, like you said, Meg, the way that crime specifically was treated, at first you're oh God, here we go again, a brutal murder, but then it does kind of delve into more, and especially that's probably my favorite part, I think, learning about the, you know, the 3 girls who are kind of in the midst of it, and you know, they're obviously from impoverished backgrounds, and their friendship I thought was really at times hard but interesting to watch because, you know, they're really up against it and they're really awful to each other, but then there are moments of tenderness. So that was really interesting. But yeah, I think a little bit by the end I was okay, it felt paint by numbers.
Yeah, and I think as you're hinting at, there's a lot going on in this show. There's a journalist character, that's the Riley Keough character. There's the detective Cam. They've got a relationship going on. There's flashbacks to the past. There are troubled youth. There's elements of race that's coming into this too. I almost thought it was trying to do too much and tick too many boxes. I know the directors and makers have spoken about how they wanted to approach the crime with radical empathy, given it is based on a real story. But I did feel that maybe it held them back from going as into some of these dynamics as they would have, and they kind of skimmed the surface of a lot of these issues, kind of issues of socioeconomic backgrounds, issues of race. They kind of glided along the surface, and to me it almost felt a bit bland, and maybe it could have gone more in depth on some of these things. Why don't we talk about, it is set in the 90s, and the 90s element is actually quite a big part of this show, in particular BIGs.
I was waiting for you to, whether you were going to go Biggie or you would spell it out.
I knew you would look at me for this. 1997 opus Life After Death, which is a huge part of the show. How well, Meg, did you enjoy that setting of the 90s, and how well do you think they captured that time?
Yeah, I mean, look, I was 6 in 1997, so my perception of the moment is probably a little different to some other people, but I think that they captured the era really well, and I think that specific point in time is a really interesting one to tell this story. I mean, it was a time where a lot of young girls were reclaiming power in lots of ways. I mean, 97, is 1 year after The Craft came out, which, you know, had teenage girls acting a bit witchy and feeling like they had supernatural powers. You saw a scene in one of the early episodes, the girls are doing like a seance at a party. You know, they were feeling like they could have a more masculine style. She's got the Steve Madden kind of combat boots. This was the era of like, no doubt's just a girl. You know, 97's the year that Spice World came out. These are not Spice World girlies. They're much more about Tupac and Biggie. But I think it's a really great exploration of, you know, what power young women had at this time and whether that power was dispersed equally, because as you said, the girls featured are pretty disadvantaged in a lot of ways and feeling a lot of their anger comes from that disadvantage, whether that's socioeconomic or racial or religious in some respects, and it really butts heads against one another. So I felt it was such an interesting exploration of who gets what power and why and how do they use it against each other. I mean, the white girls in this little gang, the Crip Mafia cartel,
CNC.
They seem pretty keen on a particular type of culture that they're weaponizing pretty appallingly against the black and non-white people in their group.
Yeah, that's really well put, because part of the thing this show does is walk a really fine line between capturing the savagery of the crime that is committed, but also placing the perpetrators in the context of their troubled lives. Do you think it did that successfully, Thomas?
Yeah, I think so. Just 1 second, going back to the 90s, I did
Of
think...
course, your favourite era.
It was nice to see, like, people smoking on screen. 'Cause
That was not what I thought you were going to say.
Wow, what a takeaway.
Yeah, but Riley
Do you
Keough,
not watch any TV?
she smokes. No, but like she smokes all the time, and then
Yeah.
like famously in Mary v. Town, obviously my favourite crime show, she vapes, which I remember was like one of the first time I saw someone vaping like on screen in like a modern crime drama. And whereas like there's so much smoking in this show, and I know obviously smoking is bad, etc., but it felt like it really like placed it in the 90s when it was just like people did it without thought, rather than like a fucking Blackberry Ice or whatever. She was just like, you know, handing out cigarettes. They were like probably $5 for a packet. So I quite enjoyed that. And
So nostalgic.
Yeah.
also the fact that there was just like, I think you take this for granted, but no phones. Like,
Yes.
you know, like Reno at one point runs to a payphone at one point.
Yeah.
But like just that, you know, obviously we take it for granted now, but when you think about telling a story like this, and this is something I often think about generally, it's so much easier to commit a crime in the 90s. Because like it's so hard now to get. I mean, I know because I've been trying. It's so hard to like get away with the crime now because everything is like. Whereas in that era, like even like obviously Rena like kind of goes missing for all this time, and there's like a little tiny bit of CCTV. But like whereas now so much of that would be captured. Like you can so easily trace back because of technology. Whereas back then, you were just smoking and in the dark.
I think that's a good point, and a lot of authors and film directors and TV makers are setting their shows just slightly before technology really takes hold for that very reason, because the logistics of trying to commit a crime and solve it when there is internet changes everything. Well, we were talking about Riley Keough's character, Rebecca Godfrey, who is this journalist who comes back to write her book, and then she gets really entangled with these children. Thomas, have you ever covered a story like that?
Yes, actually. No, look, I've never really done, sadly. I know we'll get onto your crime career. Mel, for the listeners, spent a lot of time working as a court reporter. She likes to mention it probably twice a day, I reckon.
Some of us have to do real journalism here.
But yes, no, sadly, I haven't had to go to a small town and look at a murder yet. Perhaps one day. But yeah, I don't know, did it speak to your time as a court reporter?
Look, no, not really, because I think Riley Keough is good in this, but her character, which is based on the real author of the book, gets away with so much in this. And I don't think she's ever held ethically or morally culpable for what she does, which is hang out with teenagers, kind of really get involved in a police case. And
I'm pretty sure she does acid with a 14-year-old boy.
Yeah, she drops acid.
Which
she's sleeping over with him. She's sleeping over with him. She's kind of misleading the cops, influencing the kids to kind of what testimony they give. And to me, the show just really let her off and didn't really examine the role she was playing, which I thought she was completely out of line in a lot of the way she did. And what was she getting out of this? She was getting a book deal, which she was working on. And the show at one point shows the New York Times ad for the book that's coming out. And you can't help but feel that she's capitalizing on this crime so much, but the show doesn't really hold her to account for this. Meg, did you like her character?
I'm not sure how I was supposed to feel about her because everything that was presented to me, like, she seemed like a bad writer. Even when she's entering the town, she's got this like book full of notes saying like it's a terrible story. She's jumping on this thing without any real direction or ethical guidance or sense of what she's doing. She's ruining this actual like police case of murder. It all seems really critical in a way that it didn't ever seem to really, like, it felt like I was supposed to be rooting for her when she's just, you know, making a mess of the situation and for pretty poor results. I mean, the stuff that she says into her voice recorder that's supposed to be these like very insightful notes, it's terrible. It reads so terribly.
The whole idea of the voice recorder when she's sitting at the cafe speaking to it, I mean, can you imagine doing that?
I know, that felt like a bit cringe. I thought Riley was pretty good, though. I like Riley. I mean, we love Elvis's family.
Yeah, I think she did what she could with a script that we love Elvis's family. I think she did what she could with a script that probably made her character pretty 2D.
It kind of feels like what you were saying before. I agree that the show is really spread thin across a lot of people. And what the most interesting part is actually these young girls, and it needed more time to focus on them. But the show is kind of sold by its big stars. You've got Lily Gladstone, you've got Riley Keough, so you want to make the most of them. But that feels really not ideal for the story that is the most interesting in the plot, which I think makes it a bit scattered.
Yeah, totally. And there is this relationship between Riley and Lily. Thomas, you mentioned that you like seeing Lily Gladstone in her first role since Killers of the Flower Moon, which we probably all think Osman is sitting at home watching on repeat right now, where she is really good playing Molly, and I think we all agreed deserved to win the Oscar for that role, but lost out to Emma Stone. I thought she was really good in this. I think she plays understated really well. I think Riley can overact in a way with the emotions, but Lily has this pared back kind of thing where she can give a lot but not in an obvious way. I really liked her as this detective, and I wanted more of her and could have almost done with less Riley and cut off some of the other issues and had her as a real kind of more of a lead character in this. Did you think she did good?
Yeah, I think she was good. Like, she's obviously a good actress. Obviously, in case she's listening, well done, Lily. But no, I think it's more just like I think I'm just personally curious, like, about. I just find it interesting about like the decision-making process for someone like Lily Gladstone when you've like come off a massive movie where also that movie was like really about her, Killers of the Flower Moon. She's like, she dominates it. It goes for like 7 hours and she's like on screen for 6 hours and 50 minutes. Whereas then like this, I just found it interesting because it's not a really, like maybe on the page she was like, this is going to be like a super buzzy project. I don't know. Like it has got buzz, but I don't know if for her it was like such a great showcase of her talents, even though she is good in it. So I just thought that was a kind of an interesting, like, sideways move for her, like, career-wise. And I wonder if she's kind of, like, sitting somewhere with her agents being like, well, like, we did that and, like, probably, like, won't rush into another, you know, like, TV project. But, yeah, I thought generally, you know, they were good together. I actually thought, like, there were some things this show did which were at least interesting. Like, you know, there is obviously we spoke about Rena being, you know, like the children of these Indian immigrants and Jehovah's Witnesses, and we do get like a kind of sandwiched in the middle, like a bottle episode that tells the story of her parents meeting, and it's basically a complete flashback episode, watching her dad, you know, like migrate to Canada and being kind of like, he's not a Jehovah's Witness, but he gets like sucked into, you know, the community there, and then he meets Rena's mother, and it's like a full flashback episode, which I thought was interesting. Like, again, that part of that was like, I can see what the show is doing. Like, it's like taking a format that has been done successfully elsewhere and just kind of like transplanting it. I don't know if it worked, but I was like, oh, props for trying.
Yeah. What did you think about Lily, Meg? Because in some ways this isn't a whodunit, because you do know whodunit pretty early on. So the role of the detective is a bit of a different one to your conventional crime drama. Were you happy with the amount of Lily you got in this show?
Yeah, I suppose it would have been nice to see a little more, and I agree that she was a stronger character than Riley Keough as journalist. I suppose a comparison is Kate Winslet in Mare of Easttown, and that was kind of seen as her stepping out onto the small screen, having a big role in a different way. So it could have been that Lily was shooting for that kind of thing. It also could have been that she shot this before Killers or at the same time as Killers. Like, yeah. Who knows how these things work. I don't think it was a poor use of her talent, though. I think she does this kind of silent stoicism quite well. She's got a real sense of righteousness and doing the right thing. It would be nice to see her in different kinds of roles, because obviously those are qualities that are pretty similar to her character in The Killers of the Flower Moon. And I think it's often easy to cast this, you know, such talented Indigenous actress with the same kind of thing over and over again, because she does it well. But, you know, she's a very talented actress. I'm sure she can do loads of different things. It would have been nice to see a bit more range as well.
And did you guys go down the rabbit hole of this one into, because I did find myself on this case looking up where the real life killers were at. Did you guys do the research before you watched it or after you watched it, or have you gone down that rabbit hole?
I have gone down that rabbit hole. Obviously, like, you know, an official spoiler alert for anyone listening who is in the middle of watching the show, but particularly the kind of the main young guy in it, Warren Galatsky, who I think the actor's from Euphoria. His character kind of like he had a really interesting like post-crime journey in terms of becoming like an advocate for justice. He became quite close with Brina Verk's family, and that's, you know, it was really interesting. And then also I watched like it must have been like, I don't know, Today USA interview with Jo, and she is kind of exactly what you would imagine her to be. But yeah, I guess, and you know, back to, I guess, the original point of what is the appeal of these types of projects, that also I think is like big for me, getting to do the post-show like Wikipedia and Google until you like read every single piece of like information out there about what happened to these people. I do think that's like always fun.
Yeah, it kind of troubled me a bit. These kids were so young, as the show makes a real point of expressing when this incident happened, that then to fictionalise it, you do wonder about the real life consequences on their life going forward. I mean, we have seen how some people, like Anna Delphi, of course, has capitalised on the fame that a Netflix series did, but hers was obviously a very different case, and people had a different relationship to what she did to these kids. Meg, I know earlier you were saying that was part of your concern about these shows that are based on real events. Have you gone and done all your research on what happened to the real characters?
I wouldn't say I've gone and done my research. I've done just enough research to have this conversation, because I only watched the first 3 episodes, which don't really get you a full understanding of who done it exactly. So I know the outlines of what happened, but not, you know, the full characterizations or interviews they did after or their whole life.
Are you going to keep going with it?
Yeah, I think I will. Yeah, I definitely will. I don't know if I'll then do all the research, but I think it's a worthwhile show to jump into and see all the way through.
Yeah, good mix after you've watched like 15 episodes of Taskmaster.
Yeah, maybe the comparison is quite harsh for me as well. I'm like, what a show, prestige television.
From a real life story to a fictional one, let's move on to Presumed Innocent.
I just want to make sure that we have everything exactly right.
Let's get started.
Are you aware that Carolyn Williams was murdered? When was the last time you were in Carolyn's apartment?
We had cases together. Sometimes we would work after hours at her apartment.
Your fingerprints were found in her bedroom. Were you and Carolyn romantically involved?
My suspect. Because I did not kill her.
3 apps are out now on Apple TV. This is based on Scott Turlow's best-selling 1986 legal whodunit of the same name, which has already been adapted for screen in 1990, wow, starring Harrison Ford and our own Greta Sacha. Had you guys seen this movie? I had not seen it, so I went into the TV show knowing nothing about the plot, but
Yeah,
I know many people adore the film. Had you watched it?
I've never seen. No, I hadn't seen it, and I'm curious because I'm so into this show now, so I don't want any spoilers from anybody.
What about you, Meg?
I hadn't seen it. I'd heard of it, obviously, and I know that, yeah, people really hold it in high respect. After I watched the first couple of episodes of the TV show, I went and watched the movie. I've watched 3/4 of the movie and Googled the last bit of the plot, which is very important. And look, I had to go to sleep. I'm sick. But it was really interesting to compare the two and compare the performances with Jake Gyllenhaal and Harrison Ford, which are very different. Compare the story, different treatments of the story, particularly its treatment of women, which
Yes.
it is, yeah, we can talk about.
Yes, I would love to. Well, that is really interesting. So the miniseries is created by David E. Kelly, who we know loves legal shows. He was behind Big Little Lies, Boston Legal, Ally McBeal, my favourite. The miniseries stars Jake Gyllenhaal as a prosecutor who becomes the prime suspect in the murder of one of his colleagues, Carolyn. There's some really great supporting roles here, Bill Camp and Peter Sarsgaard, who are in the prosecutor's office. Peter Sarsgaard, in real life, Jake Gyllenhaal's brother-in-law. So there you go. Fun little addition. Meg, what did you make of the show? And having also gone back and watched the movie, which one do you prefer?
I really prefer the TV show a lot. It's so juicy and pulpy. You know, sometimes I kind of catch myself feeling bad for enjoying it so much. There's quite a lot of explicit leering shots of, you know, Carolyn's dead body and these throwback scenes of when they were having sex. And it's just like, it's made to be quite deliberately juicy in that way, but it really hooks you as well. Like, Jake Gyllenhaal's performance is out of control. He is sweating. He is manic. Love that for him. He's such a good actor when he's allowed to just go full crazy. Like, I mean, anyone who's seen him in that role in Okja knows just how crazy he can go. I loved that. It's just, yeah, there's great political intrigue with him in the kind of district attorney's office, which doesn't sound interesting, but is in the context. And I particularly love that this TV version allows for a lot more scope of what's happening in his home life. So, I mean, he's had this affair with his co-worker. She's then died. It goes on from there. But in the movie, there's not much scope given to his wife to have much direct input on how that's affected their home life or how this ongoing court case will kind of explode their lives. And that's such a big part of the show and causes so much anguish in Gyllenhaal's character.
Yeah, I've only watched, so there's only 3 apps out at the moment on Apple TV and they're releasing it week by week. I really like this show. I don't think it's going to, is it the best show that's ever made? I don't think so, but it is so enjoyable to watch. I think the episodes all have amazing, cliffhanger notes. I think it's so polished and sleek. It reminds me a bit of Anatomy of a Scandal. It's got a Big Little Lies vibe. Like, you're in the circle of the rich and the powerful here, and you're watching how that power is wielded by everyone. There's personal politics, there's office politics, there's obviously a brutal crime. Given I haven't watched the movie, I do find I don't know which way the show is going to go, which is keeping me on the edge of my seat. Whereas I feel like if you'd watched the movie and you kind of know how it's going to play out, you'd have a very different experience watching this. But I think it's really a watchable, enjoyable show. Thomas, have you binged this?
I've seen all the episodes that are out. The supporting cast is really good, and it's a very uncomfortable watch. Meg kind of touched on it. The family element is such a big part of this. Obviously, this isn't really a spoiler, but he's had this explicit affair with his colleague, and we kind of pick up in the first episode when his wife, they're in the aftermath of it, and they're kind of patching their lives back together, and then all of this stuff gets dropped in, which makes it very clear that, in fact, the affair is not over and has been continuing, and it's almost like that element too is so difficult to watch because you're watching this guy, he's almost playing whack-a-mole, trying to patch the different holes in his life, and then you add into that when things start to unfold and he becomes the center of this crime. It's an anxious watch, which often doesn't sound like a fun time, but it still makes for a gripping kind of viewing. Again, this to me feels like a show that is very considered in terms of okay, what does it take to be a crime drama that is going to elevate you above, the rest of the many, many crime dramas. And I feel like this really has it, particularly with the politics of the DA's office. Again, we join, I guess, the show when there's a political race to be head of the DA, and, Jake Gyllenhaal's character is kind of wedded to the outgoing DA, and so there's a political element there, and I just feel like it's very much a well-rounded show, and it is, of course, a crime drama, but that's not exactly all it's offering, even though it does get very graphic. And
it is quite a graphic show, and this is Jake's first small screen leading role. I thought he was very good. I thought he stole the show in all the ways.
And
My heart, of course. He brings what he's so good at doing, that kind of dark, mysterious, broody, kind of slightly unhinged character that stole Taylor's scarf from movies. He brings that to this role so perfectly. What did you make of Jake, Meg?
Yeah, I thought he was incredible. I mean, he's got that, really manic face, his bulging eyes. I love a really beautiful, pretty boy who's not afraid to be ugly in every way. It makes the best viewing. Like, this is a man who could have just been doing rom-coms his entire career, but he is doing the weirdest stuff in film. I can't wait to see what he does on TV.
Yeah, he really does that slightly kind of unhinged thing so well.
Yeah, although that being said, I don't know if either of you guys watched Roadhouse, his most recent film, which was
I've been meaning to.
Oh my God.
Is it good?
It's so bad. It's a remake of the Patrick Swayze film. It's I think it's an Amazon film. I watched it mostly because Conor McGregor's in it. I was curious to see him acting. It was bad as I imagined. But Roadhouse, again, I don't know why I'm so obsessed with people's IMDb profiles today, but such a bad movie.
Yeah.
It's
Oh, that's a shame. I watched that one on Netflix where he plays the ambulance responder, and it's so intense. It's just an hour of him kind of making big eye faces. It was kind of quite claustrophobic.
Yeah, he's actually got a really good body of work. Have you guys seen Prisoners? That's one of my all-time favourite films.
Zodiac.
Zodiac,
great David Fincher film. Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll be seeing a lot more of him.
You bet.
Thomas, you kind of mentioned a bit earlier that, we're seeing these crime dramas aspire to be more kind of high art. Whereas in the 90s and 2000s, and Meg's still watching them, we had the kind of CSIs and the Law and Orders and procedural series. Do you think that, the kind of talking about David E. Kelly, the Boston legal era of crime drama is over?
Well, I guess yes and no. It's funny because David E. Kelly, he both did the Boston Legal, which is, that kind of, that was more of a comedy-ish, but that serial show. And then he also did Big Little Lies. I'm pretty sure he wrote that. So, he's kind of got a foot in both camps. But I do think, we had last year NCIS Sydney premiered. So, that level still exists. And there are people I just got back from New York. Don't know if you guys know, but there, you see so many billboards for shows over there, and it's still CSI season 5,000 or whatever. It's still kind of going on, but it's just there has been this massive division now where it's those shows exist for some people and whatever, and we'll keep making them, and if you want to keep watching them, they'll always be there. But now it is this kind of elevation. It's we've got the top subscriber tier of crime TV shows, and that's what these I think definitely play into. And I do think that that's a format that's been kind of molded by the Mayors of Easttown, The Night Of, what's the other HBO one, Rerun This City or whatever. It's become a genre, an offshoot of the original genre where you got to have probably a really small town. You got to explore the politics of that small town. There's got to be racial and gender issues explored.
You've got cast members.
Yeah, and it's and it's a similar thing with and we talk about so much how True Detective redefined TV and stuff. I do think all of those have kind of come together to give us this new version of crime drama. And if you really, want to get the big names and stuff, you have to deliver a product that ticks all those boxes.
Yeah, that's a good point. Do you think crime is too prestige these days, Meg? Do you miss the kind of old school?
Does crime still pay, Meg?
Well, it's interesting because shows like, CSI and Law and Order, these are still incredibly popular. I think the audience numbers would well outweigh
easily,
these kind of prestige offerings. There's a reason they're still getting pumped out at such great pace. But I feel like this show in particular is such a nice melding of both those worlds because in many ways it is just a legal procedural, and I think eventually will be once they're kind of in the courtroom deciding the case, and that has that tasty kind of hooky way of drawing you in that these other shows do. You know what's coming, you know the structure of the courtroom drama, but in the other way, it is a prestige show and that it's got Jake Gyllenhaal's his first role. It's got, this backstory with the text that it's based on, which is also big name roles. Harrison Ford in the original. And then even then it does, the discourse that surrounds a show like this will have those kind of broader social concerns. There's a lot of discussion around the different ways they treat women, and this one's not perfect as well. I feel like so many of the old shots of Caroline you see from Jake Gyllenhaal's perspective is a dead wife shot. It's oh, she's so beautiful and perfect. Look at her in slow motion in this bar.
Yeah.
But compared to the film, it's so much better. That was very much, you hear that this this hardcore prosecutor's being killed, and her boss finds out in the office, and he's like, "A beautiful, sexy gal like that? No way." It's like, wow, you knew this woman? You've really shaken up. And particularly the way that her relationships are brought up in the original film. She, these erotic thrillers of the 80s and 90s, when any woman had any kind of active sexual life, it was like deviant in some way and usually ended in violence in some way. So Carolyn in the original had a lot of sexual partners, and that was kind of painted her in a particular light. And so when people find out about her murder, it's like, well, I suppose that's what happens.
She had it coming.
Awful. It's really, really bad.
Yeah.
So at least in this retelling, she's a human being. She's allowed to have sex and not be murdered. It's an interesting retelling on that respect. But also I'd say it's, I've heard a lot of people who've read the book and seen the film and are now watching the TV show and say that it actually has deviations from the original text in some ways. And I don't know all of them because I haven't read the book. But I think it's still a really interesting watch if you have seen those things, because they're really playing with the text and what twists you think are coming and don't come. And it may surprise you, I suppose. Even reviewers in the US who have seen everything but the final episode, they don't know, who actually did the crime. So we could all be surprised.
Yeah, that's good. We'll keep you watching. Even I haven't seen the original, but it is a bit of a weird representation still of Carolyn, the colleague who is dead. There are quite a lot of graphic shots of her body and the violence against her. And then there are a lot of kind of flashbacks to sex scenes. And then I won't say what it is, but Jake makes a discovery about her, which also then feeds into a different shaping of her, the discovery after she's dead that affects him. That feeds into the shaping of her, maybe in a way that is a bit uneasy with what they're trying to do with that discovery. But, I mean, watching both of these shows, Under the Bridge and Presumed Innocent, back to back, obviously one is a true story, one is a fictional, but, it is hard to ignore that so many of these shows hinge on really awful things happening to women.
Yeah. I know. It's like, it's a strange thing, because it's like this kind of self-fulfilling problem of the genre that everyone, especially nowadays, knows is like not okay, and yet we can't seem to like break the, like, you look at so many of these shows and it's just like it's always the same thing. Even like, thinking about like lots of Australian shows, The 12, like that was a really horrible crime, like to a young girl. Like it's like we're also self-aware that this is the formula and like the pitfalls of that formula, and yet like consistently a new show will come out and it'll be like a young girl missing in a small town. Everyone's like, fuck, that looks pretty good. I might watch it. Like, I don't know. It's just like, how do you change that hardwiring of the genre? Like,
yeah, Meg, beyond these two shows, is it kind of lazy plotting, or is it also kind of a reflection of the world in which violent crimes are more likely to be committed against women?
Yeah, I think that's the difficult truth that's hard to avoid when you're telling these crime stories, and particularly true crime, in that, it usually is women who are subject to this kind of violence, and it's usually from men. So that is hard to get away from in many respects. I will also shout out Deadlock again, though, because that is based around men being murdered in a small town in Tasmania. So a fun spin on the genre.
That's very true. And I mean, I think what is interesting about these shows, as opposed to other crime series, is that they do, to varying levels of success, try to hold space for the victims as well-rounded characters. So they're not just explicitly a way to move the plot forward or to give other characters an arc. They do try to hold room for them.
And I think especially with Under the Bridge, that kind of like very meta narrative takes place in the story, where like Riley Keough's character is writing this book and she's kind of like more focused on the salacious details, and she has these like dealings with Rena's family, and that kind of then begins to shape her, I guess, like consideration of how much weight she needs to actually give to the victim. And it, like, I think that show does a pretty good job of it. But yeah, I mean, like you said, it is probably a sad reflection of the fact that this is typically how it tends to go. And so it's hard to like drift away from that source material too much, which is why I might just keep watching Vera on ABC, because she's got that funny little hat. It's always cute, like kind of like county crimes.
You should try Father Brown too. Nothing like a detective in a collar.
I think for me, like one of the, and I lots of people name check this, but have you guys both seen Broadchurch? Mm-hmm. Like Broadchurch to me is like, that's a great crime show that doesn't feel too like, icky, but...
How do British filmmakers and TV makers make murder seem so cute. How does that happen? I'm not really well versed in the genre.
Yeah, I think
Melanie,
they don't
you
really
spend a lot of time watching ABC at night.
they don't really show a lot of too much of the graphicness of the crime, and I think it's just the English way. They're repressed kind of their repression. They don't really leave room for emotion. You know, they've got a job to do and they get it done. Also, I think there's something about, because there's so many episodes in some of those BBC ones that have gone on for so many years, like they don't really have to give any emotion because you know it's going to be solved by the end of the episode.
Yeah.
And
Is it Happy Valley, another one that's been going on for like 500 years?
yeah, that's actually a really good show.
I'm in shock.
I can't believe I'm here defending British crime. Which, though, that does kind of bring me, as I was saying, you can go back and watch all of those episodes. Under the Bridge came out all at once in Australia. Presumed Innocent coming out 2 episodes to start and then week by week. Do you prefer your crime served up to you in one sitting, or how do you feel about the week by week?
No, actually, I think particularly with a Presumed Innocent, even though I was like really into it, I think that suits perfectly a weekly drop. I just like, it's a bit too much to take in, and you can't really like, I think the episodes are like close to an hour. You probably need to like marinate on it a little bit. Under the Bridge I thought wasn't as like probably like suited. You could just like go at your own pace. But I think generally with these crime shows, it's better to have them like teased out week over week. You don't want to be like, it's a lot.
Yeah, I also feel like because Presumed Innocent, the concept is quite simple. It's okay to wait a week. Like, you're not going to forget who was that character, what were they doing, what is this plot. Whereas Under the Bridge has so much going on that I think watching it week by week, you could very easily forget where you're up to and lose your way in that story.
And multiple timelines and stuff as well.
Yeah, it becomes a bit more confusing.
It is a bit of shame, though, because, I mean, you know, I've seen 3 episodes of Under the Bridge now and you've seen the full series, and you don't get to discuss it in the same way. There's not that kind of, you know, what do you think's happening here? What do you think's happening with this person? Who do you think did it? Because everyone's experiencing it at different times, which is a bit of a shame.
Yeah, you kind of miss the water cooler moment, which I feel Presumed Innocent has, particularly for...
It has for sure.
Yeah, a generation
The ends
that
of those
hasn't watched
episodes,
it.
oh boy, they get you.
Yeah, good. All right, let's move on to impressing our friends.
Or as you wrote in the script, recommendations for friends, even though the segment is called Impress Your Friends every single week.
That's like,
She's putting her own stamp on it, okay?
Yeah.
That's like a more austere one. Like this
Recommendations
segment
for friends by
for
Melanie Kembrick.
any friends you may have. All right, recommend to us your friends, Thomas.
Well, my one is a bit of a strange one this week. It's actually the new David Sedaris long read in the New Yorker. I don't know if you guys know, but I was recently in New York.
You
reading
also love David Sedaris.
I do love... I mean, that's not like a weird thing.
No, I know, but I think you are like a true fanboy.
Yeah, I love Sedaris.
Yeah.
And I think, you know...
Which I like.
Meg, do you like Sedaris?
I do. The idea of you reading a Sedaris article in the New Yorker in New York while eating a bagel and thinking about your bagel business is extremely funny.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's like fucking not far off, to be honest. No, but I actually bought a bunch of magazines while I was there because I was like, that's kind of what you do when you're overseas. Like, I don't buy magazines any other times, but I bought like... It's kind of a novelty too because I got like Vanity Fair, The New Yorker, and some other fucking magazine. Anyway, but like...
Shout out print media.
But I just bought it because I was in a bookshop, and then I opened it up and I was like, oh, there's actually a Sedaris story in here. And he doesn't write for them that often anymore. And yes, I do really like him. Saw him last time he came out at the Opera House.
Did you meet
actually
him?
Kind of a weird show, to be honest. He's going drifting a little bit into like the kind of weird older man woke, like weird older man, like I hate cancel culture territory, but that's a story for another day.
That's not as fun.
Anyway, impress your friends with this David Sedaris long read because it actually is really funny. It's called Notes on a Last-Minute Safari, and it's basically, as many of his stories are, it's just about a trip he and his husband Hugh took to Kenya, a last-minute safari, and it's very, very funny. He talks about kind of the strange dichotomy of being like on these like, you know, made for tourists tours, but then also staying in what, you know, he calls the most glamorous tent that he's ever been in. It's like better than most apartments he's ever owned. So yeah, it is classic Sedaris, very funny. I enjoyed it. Can recommend specifically eating a bagel while enjoying it in the Lower East Side.
A bagel from Thomas Mitchell's new bagel business.
Yeah, watch this space for the bagel business coming soon.
Can I ask, I used to be very into David Sedaris.
And did you grow out of it?
No, but I did. He's obviously very good at what he does. But is he still... I feel like once you've read like a lot of David Sedaris, you kind of get his thing. And I kind of grew out of it.
Oh my
No,
God.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But has
I mean,
he
you're not kidding,
changed
though.
his style? I mean, I haven't
but
read
like,
his stuff for like a long time.
mean,
but has he changed his style, or
no.
he's still doing what he does really well?
Yeah, I think sadly for my simple tastes, Melanie, I enjoy what he does. I think he's funny. I agree. Like I've read all of his books. They all give you the same thing. You probably don't want to you can't read them back to back to back. But yeah, I think he's a really funny writer, and sometimes I just want to have a laugh while I am reading.
Thank you for your
So yeah,
recommendation.
for me and the other people who like the low hanging fruit, read Notes on a Last Minute Safari by David Sedaris, and then
I love the segment's called Impress Your Friends and You've Only Been Roasted by Your Friends.
yeah, exactly.
That's why we rebranded it as recommendation for your friends.
It'll impress my dumb friends. If you're friends with Melanie, then obviously check out Parade, the new cast. It's completely fucking incomprehensible, but...
All right, Meg, what are you... Okay, yeah, I'm sorry, I've made this a very antagonistic
all right, Meg, what have
Sorry,
you got?
everyone. Sorry this has happened. Meg, what have you got for us?
I have got an album because I don't have much TV to recommend on 10 Play, unfortunately. It's Jessica Pratt's new album, Here in the Pitch, which came out last month, but I'm slow to getting to this week. And also her music generally. I mean, this is her 4th album. She's been around for a while. The kind of person who her songs pop up in Spotify playlists all the time when I'm just like, ooh, songs for a rainy walk. And it's like, ooh, so dreamy, so nice. But this album in particular is really great. For people who don't know her, she's a singer-songwriter from the US who's been compared to Joni Mitchell a lot. She does folk music, but kind of like ethereal, psychedelic folk type stuff. This album in particular was inspired by LA in like the late 60s, so it's got deep Manson vibes for all those murder heads out there. This kind of sunny and sinister mix, which is really nice listening at the moment when, you know, you're in a cold, wintry Melbourne morning and want to feel like you're in sunny 60s LA.
I think that is so true, Meg. I really agree with this recommendation,
Oh my God.
mainly because I made it a few weeks ago.
Oh, you did? I missed it.
I think this album is so good that I reckon we can have it twice on there just for people who haven't listened to it. Because it's a short album too, but you just feel like
I
you're
was
in
just going to say it's
sunshine.
nice. It's like 9 songs.
Yeah.
It's so digestible. You don't feel overwhelmed by the content of some other creators.
Would I get it, or would I...
I reckon I can see you with your New Yorker and your bagel and listening to these kind of folky sounds. I think you'd love it.
As long as you could be there to explain it. Here we go. What is yours?
Okay. Mine is Queenie, which is on Disney Plus. It's based on the book, Candice Carty-Williams' book. It's a 8-episode series. It's kind of a coming of age. It's set in South London. It follows the main character's Queenie's she has a breakup and then recovering from that, but it's got a lot about her family dynamic as well. Look, it's a really watchable show that's getting better with every episode. I'm about 4 episodes in, but it's a really good depiction of South London, Gen Z. There's lots going on in it, but it's also very funny. So if you're looking for a kind of nice show
Change your pace
to
from
watch,
the many murders.
from the many murders, this is a good one. It's got a lot of heart at the same time as it's very funny, and I like all the shots of London as well.
Did you say it was on Disney Plus?
It's on Disney Plus, yeah.
So you can't watch
feel like
it,
there's so
Meg, unfortunately.
Well, yeah.
Not
one more
for
day.
you.
One more day. I feel like there's a lot of good stuff going under the radar on Disney at the moment. I mean, that was clipped as on Disney.
Yep.
We talked about that last week. Yeah, worth checking
And of
out
course,
when
the bear
you're
coming soon, and then everything will be as it should be.
And then everyone discovers all the shows that they've missed.
Yes.
Yeah. It is like that, isn't it? When you go onto a stream you haven't looked at in a while, and you're like, I'll see it with this for the next day or two.
Do you have a little countdown timer, Thomas, for the season drop of The Bear?
No, I don't. I'm obviously very excited. And look, in one of I think it was the Vanity Fair that I read, Ayo Edebiri was on the cover. Actually, really interesting interview, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't realise...
Are you trying to do a second recommendation because your first flopped?
No, I stand by it. Me and all the Sedaris heads just getting confused by left and right. But she basically worked as a barista at this restaurant in New York called ABC Kitchen. And the day I read the story, I went there for dinner. So
Wow,
that was-
because of that?
No.
Oh.
Like before, like when she lived in New York and was just studying acting or whatever, and was like a barista there, and then so that was a fun tie-in.
Wow, that's great. There you go. You didn't see anyone famous, but you got to go
Yes,
to
I
where
got
a
to
famous
have-
person had worked.
Yes, close proximity to where Eddiebury once worked, which is good enough for me.
What a highlight. Well, thank you so much, guys. We'll be back next week to no doubt talk about the bear.
Yes.
Thanks, guys.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye.
This episode of The Drop was produced by Chi Wong. If you enjoyed listening to today's episode of The Drop, make sure to follow us in your favourite podcast app, leave us a review, or better yet, share it with a friend. I'm Melanie Kembry, and we'll see you next week.